Do you like coffee? Since the statistics for the 2020-2021 fiscal year show that around 166.63 million 60-kilogram bags of coffee were consumed worldwide, I think it's a safe guess that the answer to that question is yes. But what if you lived in an era where the simple act of chugging an iced coffee was punishable by death? That's what we're here to find out today. I'm ThinkSoJoE, this is Things You Might Not Know, and if you love coffee, then you'll probably hate Sultan Murad IV, the Ottoman coffee hater. The Ottoman Empire is known today as being one of the longest-running empires that this world has seen thus far, not accounting for the current Bezos-verse developing right under our noses. Founded by Turkoman tribal leader Osman I at the end of the 13th century in Asia Minor, the Ottoman Empire went on to control the majority of southeastern Europe, Western Asia, and northern Africa all the way up until the early 20th century. Placing its capital in Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire had a staggering 6th century rule and became the epicenter of interactions between the Eastern and Western worlds. Historians, even today, still have a hard time coming to a consensus over how the Ottoman Empire fell, as quite a few incidents which happened near the end of its domination could qualify as precipitating events. Many automatically point to the breakout of World War I and the Young Turk movement as what toppled the empire, but now included in these discussions are the Armenian Genocide, the Arab Revolt of 1916, and the Turkish War of Independence. Over its years of moving from being an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy, the Ottoman Empire went through quite a few sultans and caliphs. One such sultan was Murad IV, who ruled from 1623 through 1640. The son of Sultan Ahmed I, who died when he was only 6 years old, Murad IV would eventually be given the title of Sultan at the ripe old age of 11 when his older brother Osman II was assassinated in 1622. During the early years of Sultan Murad IV's reign, the Ottoman Empire existed in a state of disorder with the fledgling Safavid Empire, with who the Ottomans had many problems in the past, invading Iraq pretty much as soon as the transfer of power was done. Early on, most things in the empire were under the control of relatives of Murad's mother, Kosum Sultan. That didn't stop him from causing some damage, though. In 1628, at the age of 16, Murad IV had his brother-in-law Kara Mustafa Pasha executed for the extremely vague reasoning of allegedly operating against the law of God. In 1631, the elite infantry units who served as the Ottoman Sultan's household troops, known as Janissaries, invaded the palace and executed quite a few of the higher-ups, including the then Grand Vizier. Murad IV was of course not the first sultan to rule with an iron fist, as many of the sultans before him did what they could to quell discontent and the people's dissatisfaction with their government. By 1633, many among the public of the Ottoman Empire began to voice their displeasure over the more authoritarian aspects of their leadership. Much like many eras before our current digital age, coffee houses, wine shops, and taverns were where governmental criticisms were spoken out loud and plans for revolutionary acts were discussed. Catching on to this, Sultan Murad IV decreed that all coffee houses and other related establishments where citizens could speak openly be closed. On top of closing these businesses, Murad also outlawed smoking and the consumption of coffee and alcohol throughout the empire. The punishment, if you were seen doing any of these things by those tasked to patrol for acts of dissent, was death. The form that this punishment would take is the immediate beheading of those caught in the act. And when I say immediate, I definitely mean right away. Sultan Murad IV was so hell-bent on getting rid of coffee specifically that he would dress up as a citizen and take to the streets of Istanbul himself, complete with a 100-pound broadsword, and literally decapitate anyone he saw sipping on bean juice. The Ottoman Empire was not the only one rallying against coffee at the time, as the drink was gaining popularity throughout Europe. European rulers back then were also heavily against the drink that most depressed millennials nowadays need in order to just function in the world, but most of those leaders weren't quite as ready to separate their civilians' heads from their necks. The religious leaders of the empire, who Murad IV relied heavily upon for counsel, were of the belief that coffee specifically inspired quote-unquote indecent behavior. Basically, take everything that our government has tried to use to demonize marijuana since the end of World War II and apply it here, since it's essentially the same prohibition, different era. Now, you may be asking yourself why coffee was such a big deal when it doesn't really impair you, at least not in the way that alcohol does. Well, as it's been told by historians, during a secret visit to an Istanbul coffee house, an Ottoman Grand Vizier observed how differently those drinking coffee and those drinking alcohol behaved. In general, it was observed that those drinking alcohol were apt to act more lighthearted and silly, while those drinking coffee were able to remain sober and plot against the government. Sultan Murad IV died in 1640 at the age of 27 from, of all things, cirrhosis. As it turns out, he was a big fan of the sauce himself. Murad IV's younger brother and successor Ibrahim was way more lenient about the consumption of coffee and alcohol. Of course, more lenient means that you were just beaten with a club the first time you were caught imbibing. The second time you were caught is when the death sentence would come into play, but this time, instead of being beheaded, the offender would be sewn into a leather bag and tossed into the river. None of these punishments deterred the public, as the popularity of coffee continued to soar. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Things You Might Not Know. If you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like and a comment down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that bell icon so you get notified every time I post a new video. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can see a playlist of Things You Might Not Know videos over here. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time!